All right, so this first video is just for part 1 of your study guide. That's the geometry section. There were 4 problems, so we're going to go over those 4 in this video. There will be a second video for this part 2, the statistics stuff. So both links should be right there on Classroom for you, but this is just for the first page. Let's begin for the geometry section right here. All right, so you had to find the total area of this following shape. This is a composite shape or a compound shape. And you know that you should break it up into simpler shapes. So you can kind of see here, I broke it up into the triangle, this triangle, and this rectangle right here. And you should know your formulas, okay? They're able to be used during the test. You can refer to the back wall. They were kind of there while you were working in class, but you can also have that yellow card that you received a few weeks ago with all the formulas on it. But you want to break it up into smaller shapes, use those formulas, and then combine the areas of the smaller shapes. That first triangle, the blue one, its formula is base times height divided by 2. So you had to figure out the base was 15. It's the same as this side down here of 15. The height was 12. You had to do a little bit of math to figure that out. And the way that you can figure it out was, you know, the whole thing's 25. Well, you know, this part is 13, which that's 13 as well. So if the whole thing's 25, you could do 25 minus 13 to figure out that height. And that was 12. So base times height, 15 times 12, divided by 2. And when you work that through, you get an area of 90 for this. Well, the rectangle is just length times width, so 15 times 13. There's your area for that. And the other triangle here, you know your base. You'd have to figure out the 5, but again, you know the whole thing's 20, and you know this portion's 15. So that would be the leftover part that would make it also 20. So 15 plus 5, there's where the 5 came from. Times the height, 5 times 13 divided by 2. You get 32.5. So once you've done the 3 parts, you just want to add them together and you get 317.5 square feet. Remember, it's area, so those are square units. The other way you could have done this one, sometimes people don't break it up into 3 shapes. They just do 2 shapes. You could have done a triangle and a trapezoid. You could have done that, and if you did that, you should still end up here for your answer, but that requires that you know how to work with a trapezoid, okay? You could have done that like this blue triangle, and maybe these 2 were combined into your trapezoid right here. Or you could have done this triangle, and then the yellow and the blue could have been your trapezoid. So there are multiple ways to do it. As long as you end up in the right spot and you show your work, that's really what's more important. All right, problem number 2. Well, this one right here was the area of the door, and you are wanting to cover it with paper. But the thing you had to remember is that there's a window, and you really don't want to cover that part. So you're really just working with rectangles here, and you want the area of the door. So the measurements were 85 by 36. So you multiply those, and this is the area of the door. But you also got to figure out the area of the window, which those measurements were also given to you, 7.5 inches by 30 inches. So if you multiply those, you get 225. But you want to take away that window's rectangle. So really we're doing 3,060 minus the 225. We end up with an area of 2,835 square inches, 2,835 square inches. That was number 2. Number 3, you had to figure out how much, well, first the volume of the truck, but second of all, how many different cubes could fit in there, how many smaller fractional cubes could fit in there. So remember with volume, and I put the formula here, volume is length times width times height. Okay, sometimes we just say the base of it times the height, because that's what the length times width would represent. But you first wanted to figure out the area of the moving van. So to do that, you would have multiplied its length and its width and its height, and you would have gotten 5.5 times 5.5 times 10. So it has a volume of 302.5 cubic feet. That's the volume of the truck. But what we really want to do here is figure out how many of these smaller boxes will fit inside of it. And each of those is 1/3 of a foot. So instead of 5.5, 5.5, and 10, I put for the box 1/3 of a foot, 1/3 of a foot, 1/3 of a foot. So if I figure out the volume of one box, that would be 1/3 times 1/3 times 1/3, which gives us a volume of 1/27 cubic feet. So this box has a volume of 1/27 cubic feet. That's a pretty tiny box. And so what we're trying to figure out here is how many of these boxes will fit inside there. So that really becomes a division problem. I really at that point just want to do some division. So I do the volume of the truck divided by the volume of the box. And I can use a calculator. I can type this in as a fraction if it has that ability, or I can just type it in as 1 divided by 27 and get it as a decimal. But I end up with over 8,000 boxes that would fit in that truck. That is an awful lot of boxes. That tells you these boxes aren't real big. Okay, so that would be our answer for that one. 8,167.5 boxes. I actually want to round this one down just because if I round it up, then that would be more space than the truck has. So that is number 3. You also had one last geometry problem here. Number 4, find the surface area of the net. Well, they gave you some measurements, what I highlighted in yellow, they gave you. And then you had to kind of figure out what was the other side's measurements. Like if this is 6, then this is going to be 6, and this dashed line will be 6, and so on. So if you can figure out those measurements first of all the sides, then you can figure out your rectangles. Okay, you can figure out that this is really 6 by 3, so 18, which means that's 18. This one's really 6 by 2, so that's where the 12 came from, and that would also be 12. And then this was 3 by 2, so an area of 6 and an area of 6. So if I add all those up, I get the volume of the, I get the surface area of that prism or that net, and you end up with 72 square centimeters. So again, this is just me adding up all 6 sides. I'm combining 2 of them at a time, but I still end up with 72 square centimeters. That brings part 1 to a close. Now there will be some review options. Now that you've graded your work, you can kind of see where you were good and where you might want to polish things up some more. Okay, so I'll have this review sheet available and you can isolate and select your skills based on what you feel like you might need more practice with or more help with. Okay, there's the area of shapes, there's the nets and surface area, and there's the volume of prisms. Okay, this is the skills you'll have options to for reviewing. So be thinking now about which ones you need more practice with, more support with, all right? That brings part 1 to a close. You can now move on to part 2 if you're ready to grade that part.